Welcome back to the Book Nook. So today we are going deep into some fascinating stuff for all of you new parents out there.
Yeah.
We've heard from you that you're really looking for some do's and don'ts when it comes to these early years.
Right.
And so we decided to crack open Brain Rules for Baby
Yeah, it's a great one.
to pull out some of the science-backed tips that can really make a difference in your parenting journey.
It's amazing what we're learning about the brain.
It is. So we're going to explore what all this research says about how those little brains are developing and try to give you some solid takeaways without completely overwhelming you.
I think the thing that new parents struggle with the most is this feeling of being overwhelmed
Oh, yeah.
with all this advice coming from every direction,
Yeah,
and they don't know what to listen to. And often it's conflicting.
totally. And the book actually addresses that head on. It
Yeah.
says that, brain science doesn't have like a specific answer for every single parenting situation,
Right.
but it does give you these really powerful, like big picture principles that can kind of act as your guiding light.
It's like having a compass instead of a map.
Exactly.
It gives you direction, but you still have the freedom to choose your own path.
Exactly. Okay, so one of the things that the book brings up early on, and it might kind of shift your perspective, is the idea of friendship.
Really?
Yeah, it basically says that a huge predictor of kids' happiness later on in life is, are they able to make friends and keep them?
It's so interesting how that social element is so crucial from such an early age.
And so I never thought about it this way, but it's not just like a personality thing. It's actually like a skill that they develop,
Oh, absolutely. And it starts so early.
even as babies.
Yeah.
And a huge part of that is being able to understand nonverbal communication.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So like all those subtle cues like facial expressions, body language, things that we kind of take for granted as adults,
Right.
they're just learning all of that.
It's like they're learning a whole new language.
And the book talks about how something like learning a musical instrument can actually boost that ability to understand nonverbal communication by like 50%.
Wow. That's incredible.
I know. Who knew that like piano lessons could be such a social intelligence booster?
I mean, it makes sense when you think about it.
Right.
Music is all about interpreting those subtle changes in tone and rhythm.
And so it's like those same brain regions are involved in picking up on those social cues.
Exactly.
The book also raises a flag about too much texting as kids get older,
Oh, yeah.
saying it could actually like hinder those nonverbal skills they need for face-to-face interaction.
It's something to be mindful of as our kids grow up in this digital age.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of, sifting through advice, I know you mentioned feeling bombarded with all these different opinions, even from experts.
Oh, yeah.
And the book talks about this too, especially around things like getting your baby to sleep through the night.
Oh, gosh.
Like everybody's got an opinion and they're all different.
And they're often completely the opposite.
Right, exactly. And you're just left thinking, who do I listen to?
You're like, I just want my baby to sleep.
Yeah, I know. And the book acknowledges that it's frustrating. It basically says, brain science can give you those big picture rules, but it can't always tell you exactly what to do in every little situation.
Because every baby is different.
Right.
And every parent is different.
Exactly. And every family dynamic is different. So there's no magic formula.
It's about understanding the ingredients and then adapting the recipe to fit your own family.
That's such a good analogy. Okay, so the book also emphasizes that while we tend to focus a lot on those early infant months, what happens in the first 5 years really has a lasting impact.
It really does.
The book stresses how much those experiences shape their behavior even as adults.
Right.
And it brings up this fascinating study,
Oh, yeah.
the High Scope Perry preschool study, where they followed low-income preschoolers for 40 years.
40 years! That's incredible.
I know, all the way to their 40th birthday.
Yeah.
And the kids who had been in this high-quality preschool program, they had some really remarkable outcomes. Things like lower rates of crime, higher earning potential. It really shows how much those early experiences matter.
That's so powerful. Okay, let's talk about something I know a lot of expectant parents wonder about. All those products that claim to boost your baby's brain in the womb.
Yeah. The in utero Mozart and all that.
Exactly. Does it really work?
Well, the book is pretty clear on this one.
Okay.
It basically says, watch out for all these products making big promises about fetal brain development.
So they're saying it's not really backed up by science.
Not really. They say there's no real proof that things like those in utero universities or playing Mozart to your belly or using devices like the Pregaphone actually do anything.
I can see why parents would be drawn to those things, though.
Oh,
We
totally.
all want to give our kids the best start in life.
We do. And those companies really tap into that.
They do.
But the book says for the first half of pregnancy, the best thing you can do for your baby's brain is basically leave it alone.
Leave it alone.
Yeah. That's when the brain's basic structure is forming, like laying down the neural wiring. And that needs to happen without interference.
So it's like building the foundation of a house.
Exactly. You need a strong foundation before you start adding all the fancy features.
That makes sense.
But what about, like, what babies actually know before they're born?
Yeah.
Like, are they just totally unaware of the outside world?
That's a great question. And the second half of pregnancy is when things start to shift.
Okay.
Once the basic framework is there, the fetus becomes much more sensitive to the outside world.
So they start tuning in?
Exactly. They can actually hear and smell starting around the second half of pregnancy.
Really?
And what's amazing is that they can even subconsciously remember these inputs.
So, like, they're taking it all in.
The book gives this fascinating example of the conductor Boris Brott, who as an adult instantly recognized a piece of music he'd never consciously heard before.
Wow.
And it turned out his mother had listened to it while she was pregnant with him.
No way. So these early sensory experiences can actually leave a lasting impression.
It seems so.
That's incredible. So when does hearing actually start to develop?
Around the beginning of the third trimester. At first, the responses are pretty weak, but over the next couple of months, they get much stronger and faster. And by the time a baby is born prematurely,
Yeah.
around that stage, they can not only hear and respond, but they can even start to tell the difference between different speech sounds.
Wow. So they're already starting to process language even before they're born.
Pretty amazing, right?
It is. What about movement? I know you start to feel those little kicks and things.
Yeah.
Is that important too?
Movement is crucial for proper joint development. It actually starts much earlier than those kicks you feel, though.
Real?
Yeah. It starts with this thing called quickening, around 6 weeks post-conception.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah. And the baby needs to move for those joints to form correctly. By the middle of the third trimester, they have a good amount of control over their movements,
Yeah.
which is not only fun to feel, but it's also essential for their physical development.
Okay, let's talk about something you have a lot more control over during pregnancy. Nutrition.
Oh, yeah. Nutrition is key.
What does the book say is really important in this area?
So between 4 months and birth, the fetus is incredibly sensitive to both the amount and the type of food the mother is eating.
Okay.
And malnutrition during this time can actually lead to fewer neurons being formed and can impair brain development. And that can have long-term consequences for the child.
Like what kinds of consequences?
It can affect their behavior language skills,
Sure.
IQ grades, even athletic abilities.
Wow. So what kind of dietary advice does the book give?
The advice is pretty much what you hear all the time.
Yeah.
Eat a balanced diet with plenty of fruits and vegetables.
Okay, so nothing too crazy.
Nope, just good, solid nutrition.
Good to know. And what about for women who aren't vegetarian?
The book also recommends a good source of iron, like red meat.
Why is iron so important?
It's crucial for carrying oxygen to the developing brain.
Oh, that makes sense.
And they also highlight the importance of omega-3 fatty acids, which are essential for neuron membranes to function properly.
Okay. Where do you get those?
Eating fish, especially oily ones like salmon, is a good way to get omega-3s.
Mm.
And some studies even suggest that mothers who eat more fish in the second trimester may have babies who do better on cognitive tests later on.
So it's like brain food for the baby.
Exactly.
Now, another big factor during pregnancy and really throughout parenthood is stress.
Oh, yeah. Stress is a big one.
The book has this rule about it, doesn't it?
Yes. Stress mom, stress baby.
Right.
Maternal stress hormones can actually cross the placenta and enter the baby's brain.
That's kind of scary.
It is.
Yeah.
And the book says that severe stress during pregnancy, things like marital separation, the loss of a loved one, job loss, can really negatively impact the baby's developing brain.
In what ways?
Well, they can impact their limbic system.
What's that?
It's basically the brain's emotional control center and memory keeper.
Okay.
And it can also affect their own stress response system.
So what kind of long-term effects can that have?
Well, chronic maternal stress can make it difficult for the baby to regulate their own stress hormone system after birth.
Oh.
Their brain essentially gets marinated in these stress hormones, and they might carry that heightened sensitivity with them into adulthood.
Oh,
So
wow.
they might have more trouble calming themselves down when they get
And
stressed.
so it really underscores the importance of managing stress during pregnancy.
Absolutely. For both the mother's well-being and the baby's.
On a more positive note, the book also talks about the benefits of exercise during
Oh,
pregnancy.
yeah. Exercise is fantastic during pregnancy.
And it's not just good for the mom,
Right.
it can actually benefit the baby's brain too.
There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that aerobic exercise seems to have direct positive effects on the baby's developing brain. But maybe even more importantly, it can help buffer against the negative effects of stress.
How does exercise help with stress?
Well, when you exercise, your brain releases a molecule called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
Okay.
And BDNF is basically like fertilizer for brain cells.
Okay.
It helps them grow and stay healthy, especially when they're under stress. And what's really cool is that BDNF can actually block the harmful effects of those stress hormones, the glucocorticoids. So it's like exercise creates a protective shield for the baby's brain.
That's so interesting. But is there a limit to how much exercise is good during pregnancy?
Definitely. Moderate exercise is great, but too much strenuous exercise, especially later in pregnancy, can actually reduce blood flow and oxygen to the baby.
Okay.
And it can even cause overheating, which can be risky.
Yeah.
So the key is moderation. A brisk walk, a gentle swim,
Mm.
things like that are generally good guidelines.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about the arrival of the baby and how it impacts the parents' relationship.
Okay,
The book doesn't sugarcoat it.
it doesn't.
It says straight up that couples often have way more fights in the baby's first year.
Oh yeah, it's a huge adjustment.
It is. And it can really strain the relationship.
The book actually says that marital quality can decrease substantially during this transition.
Wow. That's a bit scary.
It is, but it's important to be aware of it.
What are some of the things that contribute to this strain on the relationship?
Well, sleep deprivation is a big one.
Yeah, I can
You're
imagine.
both exhausted.
Right.
And then there's social isolation, which is especially common for mothers.
Okay.
They might feel cut off from their friends and their old routines. And then there's the issue of unequal workload.
Okay.
Women often end up doing a lot more of the housework and childcare, which can lead to resentment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the risk of postpartum depression for either parent.
So it's a lot to deal with.
It is. It's a really challenging
Are
time.
there any things that can help couples get through this period more smoothly?
Well, the book says that couples who had a strong relationship before the baby tend to do better. And couples who planned for the baby and talked about their expectations ahead of time also tend to have an easier time.
So communication is key.
Definitely. Open and honest communication is so important.
Now let's shift gears and talk about the baby. The book emphasizes that newborns are not just passive little beings.
They're not. They come into the world with some pretty amazing abilities.
Like what?
How there was this study where they showed that newborns just minutes old could imitate the researcher sticking out their tongue.
That's crazy.
I know. It shows that they're wired for social interaction right from the start.
And the book also talks about how babies are constantly trying to figure out their caregivers.
Oh, yeah.
From birth, they're really paying attention to the care they're getting.
It's all part of that attachment process.
Right.
They're basically asking, am I being touched? Am I being fed? Who's safe?
It makes you realize how important that early caregiving is.
It is. Consistent and attentive caregiving in those early months, especially before 8 months, is crucial for developing secure attachment.
And that secure attachment helps them regulate their stress hormones.
Exactly. It lays the foundation for their emotional well-being.
The book actually uses some pretty powerful examples from studies of children raised in Romanian orphanages.
Oh yeah, those studies are heartbreaking.
They are. But they really show what can happen when babies don't get that consistent care.
And the long-term effects it can have on their emotional and social development.
So it's a reminder that we're not just feeding and changing them, we're shaping their brains.
We really are. Every interaction matters.
And speaking of interactions, the book also looks at how conflict between parents can affect the baby.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. But it's something we need to talk about.
The book says that regular marital conflict can actually harm a baby's developing brain.
Really?
Yeah, it can affect their ability to regulate their emotions.
So they might be more fussy or irritable.
They might, and they might also have a harder time calming themselves down and recovering from stressful experiences.
That makes sense. If they're constantly surrounded by tension, it's going to affect them.
Exactly. And in some cases, it can even affect their physical development, things like bone mineralization.
Wow.
So the emotional environment at home really does have a big impact on babies.
It's like the air they breathe.
And We talked about some of the things that can lead to conflict between parents, like sleep deprivation and social isolation. The book digs deeper into those.
Right.
It says that lack of sleep for parents can make them super irritable.
Oh, yeah. I can attest to that.
I bet. And it can mess with their cognitive skills and their emotional regulation.
You're not yourself when you're sleep deprived.
And the book also says that social isolation, which is common for new parents, especially moms, can be really tough on them.
It is. We're social creatures by nature.
And we need those connections for our well-being.
The book actually says that belonging to multiple social groups can help protect against that feeling of isolation.
So even if you're sleep deprived and feeling isolated, just having a few close friends or family members to talk to can make a big difference.
Absolutely. It's so important to have that support system.
And then there's the issue of unequal workload at home after the baby comes.
Yeah, that's a common source of conflict.
The book talks about how women often end up doing more of the housework and childcare, which can breed resentment.
Right.
And it brings up this thing called perceptual asymmetry.
Perceptual asymmetry. What's that?
It's basically where partners have different ideas about what needs to be done.
Oh, I see.
So what seems obvious to one person might not even register with the other.
It's like they're living in the same house but seeing a different to-do list.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of arguments.
It can.
But the book suggests that developing empathy as a couple can really help.
Empathy.
Yeah, like really trying to understand and acknowledge each other's emotions.
That makes sense.
The book describes this thing called the empathy reflex.
The empathy reflex.
Yeah. It basically involves noticing when your partner seems upset and then trying to figure out why.
Okay.
So you might say something like, I see you're feeling overwhelmed with the baby and all the dishes. Is there anything I can do to help?
So it's about putting yourself in your partner's shoes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to the baby and talk about intelligence. The book has a really interesting take on this. It starts by saying that predicting intelligence isn't as simple as we might think.
Really?
Yeah. It points out that intelligence is super complex, and it's not just about brain structure or individual genes.
Yeah.
They actually use the example of Einstein's brain,
Oh, yeah.
which, despite his genius, was actually pretty average in a lot of ways.
So it's not just about the size of your brain.
Nope. It's about how all the different parts work together.
That's fascinating. So if we're looking for that smart gene, we might be barking up the wrong tree.
It seems so.
What does the book say about how to predict intelligence then?
Well, it mentions that some early infant tests can actually be pretty good predictors of later IQ scores.
Really? Like what kind of tests?
Things like cross-modal transfer, which is where a baby recognizes an object by touch that they've only seen before.
Right.
And visual recognition memory, which is basically how long they look at something new versus something they've already seen.
So it's more about how they interact with the world than about what their brain looks like.
Yeah. And the book really emphasizes that babies are natural learners.
Oh, absolutely.
They're always experimenting and learning about their environment like little scientists.
Right.
And it's important to encourage that.
How can we do that?
Let them touch safe objects, put things in their mouths, explore their surroundings. It all helps their cognitive development.
So it's about letting them be little explorers.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And another key skill that the book highlights is self-control.
Oh, yeah. Self-control is huge.
It might actually be even more important than IQ when it comes to success later in life.
Really?
Yeah. The book talks about this Ferris experiment called the marshmallow experiment, or sometimes it's called the cookie experiment,
Oh, yeah. I've heard of that.
where they basically tested kids' ability to delay gratification. And the kids who could wait longer for the treat, they tended to have better outcomes in life.
So it's about being able to resist temptation.
Exactly. And that's part of what's called executive function, which also involves things like filtering out distractions and staying focused.
And executive function is a good predictor of academic success and even things like life satisfaction.
And while genetics play a role, the book says that you can actually train your child's brain to get better at self-control.
So it's not just something they're born with.
Right. It's a skill that can be developed.
That's good to know.
Now, what about creativity? How can parents foster that in their kids?
Well, the book says it's important to follow your child's interests, even if they're not your own.
Okay.
So if your kid is fascinated by stacking blocks in weird ways, just roll with it.
Don't force them to play with the toys you think they should be playing with.
Exactly. And be an active participant in their play. Ask them open-ended questions, get involved in their imaginative games. That all helps with their language development and creativity.
So it's about being present and engaged.
Absolutely.
And we talked earlier about how important nonverbal communication is for social skills. How do babies learn those?
They learn them through face-to-face interaction with their caregivers.
Okay.
It's not something they can pick up from screens.
So those direct interactions where they can see your facial expressions and hear your tone of voice, those are crucial.
They need that real human connection.
And the book also talks about some specific practices like breastfeeding and talking to your baby.
Oh yeah, those are both so important.
It says that breast milk provides key nutrients for brain growth after birth.
Right. And talking to your baby early and often can actually raise their IQ.
Really?
Yeah. More than things like income. But the key is that it needs to be direct interaction with the caregiver.
So not just having the TV on in the background.
Right. It's the back and forth of conversation that really stimulates their language development.
Okay. What about the kinds of activities babies engage in?
The book is a big advocate for open-ended play.
Open-ended play.
Yeah. Things like playing with the box the toy came in.
Okay.
It's often more beneficial than playing with the structured toy itself.
So it's about letting them use their imagination.
Exactly. And there's this thing called mature dramatic play,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically when kids engage in pretend play that involves impulse control and self-regulation.
Okay.
And that kind of play has been shown to have huge cognitive benefits.
Like what?
It boosts their creativity, problem-solving skills, and social behavior.
So it's not just messing around, it's actually helping their brains develop.
Right.
And when it comes to praising our kids, the book says it matters how we do it.
Oh,
It
yeah.
says we should praise their effort, not their intelligence.
Okay.
So instead of saying, you're so smart, say, you worked really hard on that.
Why is that important?
Well, praising effort encourages them to keep trying even when things are hard. It helps them develop what's called a growth mindset, where they see challenges as opportunities to learn,
Okay.
whereas praising intelligence can actually backfire.
Really?
Yeah, because it makes them think that intelligence is something you're either born with or you're not.
Oh, I see.
And if they start struggling, they might think, oh, I guess I'm not smart after all.
So it's about focusing on the process, not the outcome.
Exactly. And the book also talks about things we should probably limit, like screen time,
Oh, yeah. Screen time's a big one.
especially for young kids.
They recommend no TV at all for kids under 2.
Wow, that's pretty strict.
It is. But the research shows that too much TV watching in early childhood can lead to some pretty negative outcomes.
Like what?
Things like increased aggression, bullying, behavior attention problems.
Wow. And what about just having the TV on in the background?
Even that can be harmful.
Really?
It's distracting, and it reduces the amount of direct interaction the child has with their caregivers.
So it's all about creating that quality time.
Exactly. And the book also talks about the importance of exercise for kids.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about it for pregnant moms, but it's important for kids too.
What are the benefits?
Well, kids who are physically active tend to do better on tests of executive function.
So it helps with things like self-control and focus.
Right. And if you start those exercise habits early, they're more likely to stick with them as they get older.
That makes sense. And exercising with your kids is a great way to set a good example.
They learn by watching you.
And the book also revisits the topic of texting as kids get older.
Right.
And it basically says that relying too much on texting might hinder their development of nonverbal communication skills.
So those face-to-face interactions are still really important.
Absolutely.
They provide a much richer learning environment for those subtle social cues.
Okay. The book also talks about this thing called hyperparenting.
Hyperparenting.
Yeah. It's basically when parents put a ton of pressure on their kids to achieve. And the book says that this can actually backfire.
Really?
Yeah, it can actually stunt their higher level thinking.
Because it creates so much stress and anxiety.
Exactly. So what does the book say is the real key to raising a happy child?
Well, it draws on some long-term studies of adult development, and it concludes that the single most important factor for happiness is relationships.
Relationships.
Yeah, especially friendships.
So all that stuff about social skills and emotional intelligence, it's really important.
It is,
Well-
because emotions are basically like Post-it notes that tell our brains what's important to pay attention to in our social world.
Interesting. And understanding your baby's temperament also plays a role, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Babies are born with their own unique temperament, which influences how they react to things emotionally.
Okay.
And while there might be a genetic component to it, the environment also plays a big role in how that temperament develops.
So it's about getting to know your baby and figuring out what makes them tick.
Exactly. And responding to them in a way that supports their individual needs.
The book also talks about the importance of interaction synchrony.
Interaction synchrony.
Yeah. It's basically that back and forth communication between a caregiver and a baby.
Like a conversation.
Like a conversation or a game of peekaboo.
Oh, I see.
And the book says that this kind of interaction helps the baby's brain develop in a way that promotes emotional stability.
That makes sense.
And it also helps build a secure attachment.
Right. Because the baby learns that their caregiver is responsive to their needs.
And the book provides some practical tips for emotional attunement.
Oh, yeah.
It calls them the spices of emotional attunement.
Oh, devices.
Yeah, things like paying attention to your child's emotions, connecting with them during emotional moments, accepting all their emotions, verbalizing their emotions to help them understand and label them, running towards their emotions, seeing them as teachable moments,
Okay.
and being comfortable with your own emotions.
So it's about creating a safe space for your child to experience and express their feelings.
Exactly. And finally, the book talks about how moral development happens in kids.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not something they're born with, it's something they learn.
Right.
And the book outlines some key parenting strategies for moral development.
Like what?
It uses the acronym CAP.
CAP.
Yeah. Clarity of rules, accepting warmth when you're enforcing those rules, and praise for following the rules.
Okay.
So it's about being clear, consistent, and supportive.
And it's also important to explain the reasons behind the rule.
Right. So they understand why those boundaries are there.
That helps them internalize those moral values.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But hopefully this deep dive into the brain science behind parenting has given you some food for thought.
I hope so.
And remember, the goal isn't to be perfect.
No one's perfect.
It's about understanding those big picture principles that can help your child thrive.
Right.
And if you want to learn more, the book Brain Rules for Baby goes into a lot more detail.
That's a great resource.
So we encourage you to check it out.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time in the Book Nook.